Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lauren Cooper, and I'm the lead of the Forest Carbon and Climate Program at Michigan State University. We are so pleased to present the 2018-2019 Learning Exchange Series in partnership with the Forest Climate Working Group, and welcome to this session. If you don't know, if you don't have background, the Forest Climate Working Group is a diverse group of forest interests, including landowners, industry actors, conservationists, academia, and those active with carbon markets. The group has worked together for almost 10 years to advocate for state and federal policies that work to ensure sustainable forest use and prevention of land use change. We've been in a process of reinvigorating our focus and activities, and we welcome inquiries into our work. So please reach out if you have any questions or you think your organization may be interested in being involved. As far as the Learning Exchange Series, we have a full lineup on our website right now. And here on the screen. But you can register for these individually, so please head to our website at the Forest Climate Working Group, but also the Forest Carbon and Climate Program. You can find links to the series, and so you can register now for the remaining planned series in this year. And you will receive calendar invites when you do that. As a quick note, our next webinar will take place on April 3rd, and this will feature Forest Trends Ecosystem Marketplace, Kelly Hamrick and Stephen D'Onofrio. They will present Forest Carbon Markets Overview and Potential. You can register for the session today at our website. And you'll, again, receive a register. If you're on our email list, you'll receive a registration link as well. So for today, we have So for today, we are really pleased to introduce 3 speakers from the Nature Conservancy. We have Campbell Moore, who is the Central Appalachians Whole Systems Director, Beth Wheatley, Director of External Affairs and Strategic Initiatives, and Eriks Brolis, Economic Development Lead and Senior Advisor of Global Lands. They will present Climate Action in Coal Country, Forest Carbon and Renewable Energy as Economic Diversification Approaches. Before we let them get started, we'll cover a couple of housekeeping notes. For question and answer, we welcome you to sign up or to submit questions at any point. So you can use the chat feature, and again, any point in the presentations, feel free to submit a question. We'll organize them, and we'll present them to the speakers at the end in a 10-minute Q&A. And so you'll see on the Zoom interface, it's a chat button. If you're calling in on the phone, but you can email, you can also send questions directly to forestsc@msu.edu, because we do have some folks that just call in. But if you have a question and you can send an email, feel free to reach out. And as a heads up, in case of any outstanding questions, if we run out of time, we will work directly with the speakers and have them address the outstanding questions, and we'll put them together into a PDF that will be posted on our website. Attendees today will receive a 1 credit of a CFE credit from SAF if that's of interest to you. You can reach out to us at forestsc@msu.edu, but we do automatically submit that for those that have registered. This session is also being recorded and will be posted on the web along with any supplemental materials such as presentation slides and any additional links that are mentioned today. If you've registered today, you'll receive an email letting you know when that's up and where to find it. And I think that's it for housekeeping. So Campbell, if you're ready, could you please share your screen and begin your presentation?
All right. Sharing now. Let me know when you are able to see it.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
All right.
Yep,
great.
looks good.
Looks good?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining today. So my name is Cam Moore. I'm the director of TNC's Central Appalachians Whole System Program, and I'll be presenting today along with my co-presenters, Beth Wheatley and Eriks Brolis, that were just introduced as well. And you know, there's so much exciting things happening in the U.S. right now around climate with the U.S. Climate Alliance and a lot of other emerging initiatives. But I think we all know that climate change is such a complex and overarching challenge that we really need to work everywhere to be successful. So we want to talk today about some of the work that we're doing in the Central Appalachians, really focusing on 2 projects, one at a high level, the other in depth, and you know, the innovative approaches that we're finding that we need to use to work on climate action in coal country. So I'm going to dig in. So the Central Appalachians, which is this area in this blue oval here, has been known for quite some time by TNC and partners that we work with as a really important biodiversity hotspot in the United States. This region stretches from Tennessee up to northwest New Jersey and really connects the entire Appalachian chain. But increasingly, we're finding that the story, the sort of news story around the Central Appalachians has to be about climate change. So on the left here, there's a lot to digest here, but this is the results of a 10-year-long, approximately 75-plus scientist effort led by the Nature Conservancy and partners to understand what really constitutes climate resilience on the landscape, and then to map these places and the sort of large continental networks that come from them. So again, the Central Appalachians is here in that blue oval, and pretty much everything that's colorful on here is in the top tier continentally for climate resilience. So these are the areas that we believe have the best chance of really not just surviving, but thriving as the climate changes and continuing to provide really important biodiversity protection and services for people. And in the Central Appalachians, that comes out to a huge area, about almost half the landscape and 21 billion acres of land, primarily forest land. On the right side here, this is just to help sort of visualize this a little bit. This is only one of the data products that goes into this, but it's a product we call the Migrations in Motion, which maps basically the projected species range shifts and movements for many species of mammals, birds, and amphibians over the next 100 years or so as the climate changes, based on available habitat. And you can see that the Central Appalachians here, right along the spine of the Appalachians, is basically the transportation infrastructure for nature in a changing climate, sort of the super highway of climate resilience. So we're very much about climate resilience here in this part of the world. We're also very focused on natural climate solutions, such as all the forest carbon approaches that everybody on this call is interested in and works on. So this here is from a paper put out by Joe Fargione of the Nature Conservancy last, I think, November, maybe December. And it's assessing 21 what we call pathways. So 21 different approaches for natural climate solutions, such as reforestation, avoided grassland conversion, salt marsh restoration, et cetera. Assessing the total capacity or total potential for these pathways, as well as the potential at different cost thresholds. So you'll see here that natural forest management, what we often refer to in carbon circles as improved forest management, is the highest low-cost pathway in the United States. So basically, from a natural climate solutions potential, our biggest feasible cost lever is with natural forest management. And then reforestation right above that is the highest overall natural climate solutions pathway. So zooming down into the Central Appalachians here, and talking about it, at a high level here, basically, this is a forest carbon stock map of the United States, looking at above ground carbon stocks. And again, the Central Appalachians is here in this blue oval. And in general, on this map, basically darker green means higher carbon stock. I think we all know that high carbon stocks are a decent proxy for natural climate solutions potential. It's not perfect, but it's a decent proxy. But the other attribute that this region really has is low land opportunity costs. So low competition in many places for other land uses for this forest. Some places there is intense competition, but I think we all know that, to get a forest carbon project to really work, it's often not going to be economical if there's high value agriculture competing for that land use, or residential development or something like that. So a ton of potential for NCS in this region. It's the Central Appalachians is a really socially complex and interesting place to do climate work for a couple of reasons. So we have 3 U.S. Climate Alliance states within the region. So Virginia, Maryland, and then New Jersey kind of off the map up here. But we also have some of the largest per capita and in absolute terms greenhouse gas emitters in the country. So West Virginia is the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter per capita. Kentucky is number 7. And Pennsylvania is the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter overall, which is kind of mind-blowing that after Texas and California, these massive states, comes Pennsylvania, which is obviously a large state, but not quite as big as Texas. So socially, this is a really interesting place to work on from a climate perspective, because we have some real climate leaders that are really getting out there in front of the problem, like these U.S. Climate Alliance states, and then other states that are really I think just coming to terms with how they can maybe contribute at this point. So the Central Appalachians it's a hotspot for carbon, for climate resilience, but also for poverty. This is one of the most impoverished regions of the country. The historic economic model has not necessarily worked great for the region. It's been largely an extractive model. And you can see that in this map here, which is basically a county level map of poverty rates across the eastern US, with the Central Appalachians being in this oval here. And we find that it is just impossible and often sort of unjust to do work in this region without taking account of this, whether that be public health work or conservation work or climate work. This is part of the social fabric of this area that we really have to be smart about working with. So I know there's a lot of folks on this call that are maybe thinking, okay, well, that's great. I care about poverty, kind of, but really I want to just address climate change and I want to do it urgently. Fair point, but I think it's really important for us as a broader community of folks working on climate to think about how we can get to a more durable sort of social buy-in around climate solutions. So this image here comes from the Yale program on climate change communication, and it's basically showing support for regulating CO2 as a pollutant. So purple areas, and particularly darker purple areas, are less supportive of climate policy than areas that are in green, or at least less supportive of regulating CO2 as a pollutant. So, you know, if we want to address CO2 as a pollutant and institute policy, we can do that with a lot of support in San Francisco, San Diego, and New England, which is great. That helps us get there a little bit, but the other 85% of the country is covered in purple, where people are less likely to support regulating CO2. So hold that image in your mind for a second, and then here's that carbon stock map that I showed earlier. And what we sort of realize here is the community of people thinking about natural climate solutions is we're trying to push for forest carbon as a climate solution, but right now, at least on average, the people that actually own the forest and will be making the decisions about these forests do not support climate policy as much as other folks in the country do. And that's a big problem that we're going to have to address, and it's a complex one to address, so we'll talk a little bit about that today. And this is true even in very progressive liberal states like California. So here's the Sierra Nevadas, incredibly important area from a natural climate solutions perspective, and there are actually just as purple as West Virginia, where I live. So we have a paradox here. We have a region in the Central Appalachians with high carbon emissions, high poverty, and high resistance to climate action at this point. But at the same time, this landscape holds some critical climate solutions, both in the form of these amazing climate resilient forests that people and nature depend on, and also in high carbon stock forests and really high natural climate solutions potential. So the Nature Conservancy work in the Central Appalachians is really laser focused on, okay, how do we create some creative tension out of that? How do we take this paradox and turn it into powerful solutions? And that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about two solutions. The first is our Working Woodlands program, which I'll talk about just at a really high level. My colleague Josh Parrish, who's probably listening in today, is going to talk about Working Woodlands again in May, as well as some exciting work we're doing on a family forest carbon program related to some of that work. So I'm going to keep that at a high level today. And then I'll turn it over to my colleagues Beth and Eric, who will be speaking about some really innovative work that they are pursuing in the sort of core coal producing lands in West Virginia. So what is Working Woodlands? It's a program that TNC has started a number of years ago to really help landowners conserve their forests and earn new sustainable revenue sources through sustainable forest management and also through sales of carbon offsets. The program kind of packages either working forest conservation easements or an agreement with a FSC certification and a forest management plan, often or typically maybe for these landowners, it might be the first time they've had a forest management plan. And then also we help develop their land into a carbon project, forest carbon project, and help market those offsets, helping them get a new revenue stream. So we're currently happily in a period of more or less exponential growth, I think, really rapid growth, with 12 projects totaling 67,000 acres and well over another 100 to 200,000 acres of potential projects in the pipeline. And we're seeing the real benefit of this program getting out there on the ground in often conservative areas where people are thinking of climate action as maybe a threat to their well-being, thinking of climate policy as a threat to their economic well-being, and helping them understand that they really can be a part of the solution and generate new revenue sources in that process. And also, we found these projects to just be really incredible sort of foundations for reaching out to policymakers and key influencers to get them bought in on these climate solutions as well. Just one other quick thing on working woodlands. I think everybody on this call is interested both in forest carbon, but also on the resilience side of things as well. Get a little bit of feedback if somebody doesn't mind muted. But so we are trying to basically deploy these working woodlands projects into those high climate resilient forests I was discussing earlier. So the other climate solution that we are pursuing, or one of the others in the Central Appalachians, is really focused on the core of these former coal producing areas, which my colleagues will talk about. This picture here is somewhat typical of the southern coal fields of West Virginia. We have areas of extensive surface mining, often surrounded by the other 80% of the land is in very large ownerships of coal or mineral holding companies or timber companies, but has really intact high carbon stock forests that often has really incredible conservation attributes. But the history of coal extraction has had really significant impacts on the land. So we have in the Central Appalachians about 1.5 to 2 million acres, depending on the estimate, of more or less permanent deforestation from coal extraction. So areas that were forests were mined and have been reclaimed to invasive grasslands that are often not growing back 4 or 5 decades later. So that's an area larger than Delaware that's been impacted in that way, with obviously very high carbon emissions from that. But we also have, several million acres of industrially owned coal timberland that's in intact forests, surrounded by tens of millions of acres actually of family forest owned land and other land, all of which can have an important role to play in natural climate solutions. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Beth in just a minute here, who's going to describe innovative approaches that we're using to kind of look at this whole landscape, including the surface mines and the impact forests. Beth, over to you.
Thanks, Cam. That's a great setup. So again, I'm Beth Wheatley, and I actually live just north of that coal mining site that you saw in the photograph that Cam shared in Charleston, West Virginia. And I'm just going to jump right in with a little lead in to talking about what the Nature Conservancy is actually doing to set a little more context for where we're working. So first, as you can see from this slide, it goes without saying that coal is a major driver of West Virginia's economy. As production continues to decline, we are faced with the resulting job and coal severance tax revenue losses. And that impacts funding for public schools and other public services. So the socioeconomic landscape is literally shifting beneath our feet. And it's causing community and state leaders to ask themselves, what is next for West Virginia's economy? Next slide. At the same time, our leaders are asking what's next for West Virginia's economy. The owners of former mine lands and the surrounding forests are also asking themselves what their next source of revenue is. These circumstances present a really timely opportunity to catalyze climate-friendly economic activities, such as responsible forestry, across former mine lands and the surrounding forests. This is a scalable opportunity to provide part of the answer for what is next for West Virginia's economy, and it's a chance to develop a roadmap to broader climate solutions for coal country. At the Nature Conservancy, we believe seizing this opportunity is critical. It's critical to what people in West Virginia need most, which is new jobs and new revenue streams. And it's critical to support the states and the whole coal mining region's much needed economic diversification as the world transitions to a low carbon future. It's also critical to restore and conserve our carbon-rich, resilient forests that Cam talked about. And then lastly, it's critical to climate action at the federal level. To that last point, climate action at the federal level, the Nature Conservancy's theory of change is that actions to address climate change in each state across the country will ladder up to ultimately support climate action at the federal level. And those actions must provide wins for coal states like West Virginia that are particularly challenged with a coal-based economy. One of West Virginia's US senators, Senator Manchin, was recently quoted saying, "We're going to surprise a lot of people because climate change has to be on the front burner. Everything we do has to be done with climate change in consideration." This comment represents the sea change that we're experiencing in West Virginia, where climate action has historically been perceived as an attack not only on our economy, but on our livelihoods and our identities. The door is now open to climate action by focusing on putting climate-friendly economic activities on the ground that can actually demonstrate what the wins can be for West Virginia and other coal states. So what is the Nature Conservancy's path forward in West Virginia? Next slide. You can go ahead and click to the next one. Thanks, Cam. The Nature Conservancy is proposing a collaborative project to demonstrate a blended model of 4 climate-friendly business units that are scalable across the millions of acres of Central Appalachians carbon-rich forest and former coal mine lands. These business units are large-scale solar, responsible forestry, outdoor recreation, and agroforestry. We're doing that last one in partnership with Coalfield Development Corporation. For those of you who aren't familiar with Coalfield Development Corporation, it's a well-respected workforce and economic development group. And we're working with this organization not only to incorporate agroforestry, but also specifically to build workforce development opportunities into the project to ultimately create jobs. This project grew out of the Nature Conservancy's focused outreach to stakeholders to learn what they wanted for the state's economic future. So what you're seeing here on the screen really represents a collaborative vision for what can be. We also see this project serving as a much needed focal point to build understanding amongst community and state leaders to show that these type of activities are viable in West Virginia, that they can provide new jobs and new revenue streams, and also to show that it's not a one-off project. These activities are scalable across the 1.5 million acres of former mine lands and around 7 million acres of surrounding industrially owned forest across the region, allowing us to get not only economic benefits, but climate solutions. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Eric to share more about this proposed demonstration project and dig into the solar business unit specifically. Eric?
Thanks, Beth. Well, that was a great setup, and as Beth mentioned, I'm going to dig deeper into the process that we're taking in order to deploy this demonstration site, as well as kind of the stakeholder engagement. So as you see there on the left of your screen, this is kind of a prototypical site in West Virginia. It's about a 20,000 acre parcel. And it's a combination of surface and kind of mineral impacts there on the bottom right, and then the surrounding forest, as you see encircled by the broader green. So we envision we have a business plan that we've developed where we've envisioned various activities that can occur on this site that will generate revenue. And those core business units are solar energy, which you'll see in kind of the yellow portion of the site. And then thank you, Cam. And then we envision agroforestry with our partner to develop agroforestry as a workforce development tool, but also to begin generating revenues as well as jobs for the area and producing more local food. And then for the rest of the site, that's the forest carbon and responsible forestry as the Working Woodlands program would be deployed there. So next slide, please. We see solar as the anchor tenant for this site, and we are actively searching for where there is the best potential for solar energy within the coalfields region. And we see this as the anchor tenant as well for the lease revenues that it could generate for the project to move forward. As I mentioned, the Working Woodlands program is also key, but I'm not going to discuss that at depth at this point in time. Next slide, please. The solar potential, we believe, is increasing in West Virginia. And as you note from this graphic, West Virginia is right there in the middle with 6 megawatts deployed at this point in time, whereas the surrounding states have tremendous solar deployment relative to West Virginia, with Virginia having deployed over 100 times the amount of solar, North Carolina 700 times. And we believe that, and with good reason, because solar developers are beginning to knock on our door, that West Virginia, it really is just a matter of time before solar is economically feasible, and that will occur, we believe, as increased land pressure in surrounding states increases the cost of those land parcels. So we want to steer solar to West Virginia, and next slide, please, and especially on degraded lands. We believe that there's tremendous potential on degraded lands to repurpose those for a new form of energy generation, if you will, on the minelands. And what that will hopefully yield is not only the decarbonized electricity, but also that the impact to the surrounding forests will be minimized, and the impact to surrounding farmlands, which is kind of the business as usual location for solar to be deployed at this point in time. Next slide, please. In addition, we're seeing increased social impacts from renewable energy deployment, as this slide shows. This is, I believe, last week, an article, or maybe the week before, for a 500 megawatt proposed facility in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, and it is about 6,000 acres that have been cut already for that solar project to move forward. And this is generating massive fury from the neighbors, and there's a lot of press that's surrounding this project. So we're hoping that we can steer projects towards degraded lands to minimize this type of impact. Next slide, please. So what are the site characteristics that make solar economically feasible and practical? Well, one is that there are workers and equipment. There are mine workers as there's declining coal production that we believe can be retrained and the heavy equipment repurposed in order to do site preparation. There are also nearby utilities oftentimes, because the coal processing facilities at these sites were typically electrified, and so those substations could be repurposed and allow for lower cost connections to the grid. Existing haul roads, where the haul roads for taking the coal off the site can now basically be turned the other direction, and solar panels and other equipment delivered to those sites. And then flat cleared land is the kind of ideal site for solar. As I mentioned, farmlands are typically the preferred site for many developers at this point. But there are new technologies and new racking systems and ways to install solar on degraded lands that would allow it for the flat sites here that represent these minelands. And also that it's, the last point is that it's compatible with multiple uses. So there could be pollinator-friendly habitat or some type of grazing or agroforestry happening in between the roads. Next slide, please. And Solar on Minelands is already being pioneered. This is a 7 megawatt facility that has been deployed in Vermont. So there are lessons learned from this, and cost reductions that we believe can be built into future projects in West Virginia and other coalfield regions in the Central Appalachians. So we see that this is already happening and would like to catalyze it faster. So next slide, please. And so for the demonstration project, to get that on the ground, we're engaging with key partners and various stakeholders. And this is both for us to execute on the demonstration project, but also to open conversations with surface and mineral property owners, mining companies, potential corporate off-takers for that solar energy, and potentially also for the forest carbon for voluntary compliance purposes. Electric utilities, other nonprofit organizations and solar developers, and then government leaders and regulators. So next slide, please. Again, at first blush, you might think property owners and mining companies would not be open to solar on these minelands, but that is not the case, as we are finding. Property owners are looking for replacement revenue due to the downturn in mining in the region. And these former surface coal mines, which could present liabilities, now have the potential to become assets. They are also very familiar with the current the structure of leasing lands for energy, and solar represents another lease opportunity, albeit on a kind of fixed time period and maybe a more consistent payment schedule. Mining companies, on the other hand, who are those that operate the mining equipment and lease the land from those property owners at current, may be interested in solar on minelands as a post-mine land use, because it may reduce reclamation costs for them to restore those sites and turn them back over to the property owners. Next slide, please. And with electric utilities and corporate off-takers, what is driving them to be interested in solar in the region and on minelands is that the rate of electricity, electricity rates are increasing at a fairly rapid pace. And as you'll see, West Virginia had historically enjoyed relatively low cost electricity, but those costs are increasing quickly. And now West Virginia is troubled because it's locked in to 96% coal-fired generation and is looking for a diversity of sources. Next slide. In addition to the rising costs of electricity for the current installed capacity, the cost of solar photovoltaics has fallen drastically over the last decade. If you focus on that yellow line in the center of this spaghetti mess, you'll see that over the last decade, solar has basically come from off the chart to now less costly than fossil fuel resources and comparable to wind, and those costs may even continue to decline. Next slide, please. And what this is driving, the combination of increasing electricity rates from the utility sector to lower cost for solar in general, as well as the corporate responsibility goals of many corporations now that's being driven by stockholder pressure, is driving corporate renewable energy deals over the wholesale markets. And this is a chart showing 2014 to 2018, and the rate of increase is also significant there over this kind of time horizon for those corporate deals. And in these corporate purchases, these are facilitated on large scale projects and is pushing the market, both the utilities as their current business as usual, but also in looking at ways that the electricity sector is changing as a whole. It must be noted too that we're working with these utilities and corporate purchasers to help commit to sourcing power from these degraded lands, hoping that we can steer purchasing decisions in that direction. And in addition, that we believe that allowing more renewables, and what's of interest to the policymakers is having more renewables potentially drive investments by these corporations in locating either manufacturing or other facilities within coal country to utilize these resources. And next slide, please. And the last point is I'll make that, what you saw on the corporate purchases to date is just the beginning. We're seeing tremendous interest. This is the RE100 list. So these are corporations that have committed to 100% renewables by 2050. This list changes. It's already outdated. I put this slide together yesterday. I just saw 3M committed to 100% renewables as well. So this is a quickly emerging marketplace, and we believe that's going to steer far more solar onto the grid and hopefully into the coal country. Next slide. So in summary, as a least cost carbon-free resource, we think that the future for solar is very bright, and the benefits for solar on minelands and rooftops and other degraded lands around the region can be a huge boon economically in creating new jobs, retraining laid off coal workers to apply transferable skills such as heavy equipment operation, site preparation, electrical wiring, and we're developing a workforce development program there in partnership with Coalfield Development Corporation. We believe that this could also attract new manufacturers and employers to the region, and those corporate purchases, are looking, as I mentioned, for the solar for its renewable qualities and clean energy, but also because it's long-term fixed cost power that can help reduce their fuel price volatility. And then it can also, if that solar is sited there, we believe that localities are interested in pushing this forward to replenish a much-needed tax base for both the municipalities and state budgets that have been declining as coal markets have declined, create new revenue streams for mineland owners, and minimize land use conflicts. So it's a grand vision, and yeah, we hope that with this demonstration that we can move that vision forward for the state. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Beth, for overcoming some of these barriers.
Thank you, Eric. So as you heard from Eric and Cam, there's real opportunity to advance large-scale solar sited on former minelands, as well as responsible forestry, both as business units of our proposed demonstration project, but also more broadly, to scale them across the Central Appalachians, millions of acres of former minelands and surrounding carbon-rich forests. With this said, though, this is a grand vision, as Eric said, and advancing a new climate-friendly economic model in West Virginia is not without real and perceived barriers. I could name several barriers here, but since we've just been speaking of solar energy, let me focus on that. In West Virginia, there are no state policies driving renewable energy. No renewable portfolio standard, no power purchase agreements, etc. This is a real barrier to get to scale. Our proposed demonstration project is not the full solution, but it is a critical part of the solution. We plan to undertake that in lockstep with collaborators to aim to overcome this barrier and other barriers by using the project as a focal point for community and state leaders to build understanding and to ultimately build support for state policy action. We've heard from West Virginia leaders that they want to see projects on the ground to make job creation and revenue generation from activities such as solar real. And we are aiming to do that. Next slide. You can go ahead and click, thanks. So I'd like to wrap up by leaving you with this vision. At the Nature Conservancy, we're working with others towards making this vision into reality by first getting a project on the ground in partnership with Coalfield Development Corporation, a project that could serve as proof of concept. And then once profitability has been successfully demonstrated, we see owners of other large industrial sites replicating, enabling these climate-friendly activities to get to scale, while also developing a roadmap for West Virginia and other coal states. We see on-the-ground projects done in collaboration with community and state leaders as a critical first step to get to climate solutions in coal country and to ultimately conserve and restore the network of carbon-rich, climate-resilient forests across the Central Appalachians. Thanks. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Cam to close us out.
Okay. Thanks so much for that, Beth and Eriks. That was a great presentation. So I just wanted to end with just a couple lessons learned. I'd probably say it's lessons we are learning. I don't know if we've fully learned them yet. And I think it's really applicable to a lot of our climate work everywhere that everyone on this call is really interested in. So one of them is I think we really have to take a holistic view. So both forest carbon and natural climate solutions and renewable energy are critical pieces of a sustainable and healthy climate future. And we need to be realistic about the fact that renewable energy is going to take a ton of land to really get it out there at the pace and scale that we need to deal with this problem. So we're trying to create a model here, right, where we're driving that renewable energy to these degraded lands and preventing conflict with forests for the many values that forests provide, including natural climate solutions. And I think that's really important for us all to consider and to look at land use holistically rather than in silos. Another lesson is really that culture matters. And that kind of feeds into these three bullets up here. So yeah, I think what we're learning is in the Central Appalachians, we have states that are really out ahead of this problem and really going after it. New Jersey, Virginia, Maryland, U.S. Climate Alliance states. In those states, we can and should lead with climate. But we must change the narrative on climate everywhere, including places like West Virginia, Kentucky, places like that. And natural climate solutions and renewable energy as job creators can help. So we need to understand the culture of these regions and how we can create climate solutions that fit into that so we're not banging our heads against the wall. West Virginia has an identity. It has two main identities. One is around its nature and its mountains, and the other is around its identity as an energy state ever since it was created, basically. So we're trying to create a demonstration project that plays to that. And then the third lesson is something I think we can all relate to, which is that seeing is believing. We need to get stuff on the ground to demonstrate to landowners, policymakers, and key influencers that a different future is possible everywhere, including places like West Virginia. So I will just end by saying thanks everybody for tuning in today. We're super excited to take some questions. And if you haven't spent time out in the Central Appalachians, you are missing out, as this photo helps convey. It is one of the most beautiful places in the world. So come visit.
Well, thank you very much. This is Lauren again chiming in. So Campbell, Beth, Eric, thank you very much. This is really informative, very interesting. We have some questions here. I'll let you keep the screen for now, though, just in case you want to scroll back to any. You have a number of really great graphics in there. So why don't you keep the screen for now? But I'm not sure who's best for most of these questions, so I'll just throw them out to all three of you, and you can just jump in as needed. So the first question we have here is, could you explain more about what an agroforestry project would look like? So you mentioned local food, but what exactly would an agroforestry project look like in this case?
Yeah, happily. This is Eriks, I'll take that one. So yeah, the partner organization, Coalfield Development Corporation, has a small scale site that they've been piloting some of these activities, and they're doing mixed species orchards, as well as some kind of inter-row grazing of various animals. So it's kind of the intentional combination of woody crops as well as animals. So that seems to be the best solution for these sites because the lands are fairly degraded. So growing kind of higher value species or doing like quick annual vegetables doesn't seem to work as well.
Great, thank you for that. And we have another question, and I don't know the exact context, but I know that it was mentioned, recreational opportunities were mentioned. And so this question is about more detail about what type of recreational opportunities do you envision, and what do you think demand for those opportunities looks like, and like who would you be serving with that?
Sure. Beth, would you like to take that, or would you like me to?
I'll start to answer that, Eric, and then please jump in. So in the context of the demonstration project, as we initially were looking at this, we were primarily focused on hunters, simply because there is in West Virginia a large demand for areas for hunting, and hunting leases are something that would allow us to provide an additional revenue stream on top of the responsible forestry. With that said, more broadly, we are wanting to open up through this project public recreational opportunities for the community. And there's actually, I can't speak specifically to demand, but the one thing that I can say about that is that there have been recent large investments by the state of West Virginia in acquiring and conserving lands in the southwestern coal fields of West Virginia. And I think that in and of itself speaks to the demand for new opportunities. So I'll stop with that.
Great. And I might just add to one of the other options, and one of the projects that we're looking at to emulate potentially is the Wayne National Forest in Ohio. Has been developing mountain bike trails as a public-private partnership. And we believe something like that could also be a potential for these areas that, both in the forest areas, but also on some of the minelands that, those are features that mountain bikers might find interesting to bike on.
And hey, Lauren, this is Cam. I'll just chime in with one more thing. So from a big picture point of view, actually, our whole sort of theory of change for our work in the Central Appalachian region, or in much of the region, is about supporting the transformation of a historic kind of extractive economy to a more nature-friendly, nature-based economy. We think that's critical for addressing some of these climate challenges and other things. And tourism is the fastest growing sector of West Virginia's economy, for example. So I think there's a piece too around ensuring it's all nature-based tourism, more or less. Like, that's why people come here. It's a beautiful place. So there's a piece there too around supporting those economic sectors that help us keep forests intact, for example.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. That was helpful. Another question we have here, which was kind of getting back into some of the land use questions about like the trade-offs between solar and standing forests and some of the issues with that. And this question asked, why not focus on reforesting denuded mining lands and using solar in areas that are already characterized by impervious surfaces?
Yeah, why don't I take a first stab at that, and then Eric, if you want to chime in on a piece too, that might be good. So we've looked a lot at reforestation of these surface mines, and we would love to see that happen. We are working on that we've been working on it for years, actually, with a bunch of partners, Forest Service and others. But the reality is it takes often, it's up to $2,000 an acre to do reforestation on these lands because they've been so heavily impacted, and we're talking about 1.5 to 2 million acres. So do the math, it's several $billion. And the reality is that, if we sort of zoom out and look at the whole U.S., or even just the eastern U.S., we need renewable energy. It needs a lot of land, and we kind of want to play our part in a way and allow these heavily degraded lands to be the places where some of that happens, rather than displacing forest in states surrounding the Central Appalachians, for example, by solar development, which, as Eric mentioned earlier, is starting to happen and is slowing the adoption of renewable energy. So definitely support that, and but we're just trying to figure out how to take a holistic view there. And Eriks did some assessment, which he can speak to in a second, I think, around looking at what percent at a high level, at least what percent of this 1.5 to 2 million acres of minelands might be suitable for solar, because not all of it is. Eriks, do you want to mention the results of that, even though it was high level, I know?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Cam. I think you covered that really well, but just a couple more points. Yeah, that there was approximately 400,000 acres we think could be suitable out of that total. And as Cam mentioned, a lot of that is incredibly heavily impacted, and is kind of the flatter portions of these lands as well. So that I think is one consideration. And then just to echo and kind of reinforce what Cam was saying in terms of a renewable future, as we look at some of these estimates moving forward in terms of the future needs for electricity as our lives become more digitized, and let's say the vehicle fleet gets electrified as well, and we're moving away from liquid fuels. I truly believe that there's going to be a need for tremendous amounts of renewable energy moving forward to power that type of a future. So I think we need to cover rooftops, and already impervious surfaces to the extent possible. But I don't necessarily think that's going to be sufficient to be able to get us all the way there to this broader scale renewable future.
Thank you very much. And the next question is more geared towards the forestry sector. Kind of part of this renewable future and thinking differently about developing a different sector away from coal production. But we all know that there's challenges to the forestry sector, particularly in transportation or in having adequate processing plants. Can you tell us a little bit about what the landscape's like in West Virginia now, and what the challenges are as far as developing a sustainable timber sector there?
Yeah, this is Cam. I'll take a first stab at that. So, I mean, timber production and processing already is a huge part of the economy. West Virginia is the third most densely forested state in the U.S., so definitely it's a forestry identity already. And there's millions of acres of land. I think maybe 12 million acres out of the state is working forest. But the points are really important that processing, having suitable transportation infrastructure and processing infrastructure is a big obstacle, particularly for lower value wood products that might be coming off, so pulp and other lower value wood products. So yeah, it's a big issue, and we've been looking at that for a while and trying to sort of crack that tough nut, and still working on it, on how we can make sure that there is processing facilities to support low value products coming off as well, so that we're not unintentionally incentivizing high grading by not having processing facilities for lower value products. So we don't have a magic solution for that. A lot of the infrastructure is there. Like I said, it's a huge part of the state's economy, but there is more work that needs to happen on that.
Thanks. And then another related question was, how about considerations for woody materials as biofuels? If that's currently like, what percentage of the market is that now woody waste materials or woody crops, like woody crops developed just for energy? Is that, what's the status on that now in West Virginia?
Yeah, so I don't have a great picture of that. I don't think there's much of that happening in West Virginia right now. There is, Southwest Virginia, kind of over the border, there is I think it's I don't remember what you call it, but a coal plant that also burns wood. And so I do think there's some demand for that there, but I'm not aware of that being a factor here in West Virginia at this point.
We do have another question here. This question is, how do the costs of installing solar on degraded former mine sites compare to clearing existing forest lands? And then they go on to say, to avoid perverse incentives, are opportunities being explored to take a portion of any solar revenues instilled on degraded land to be dedicated to afforestation or reclamation of other degraded lands?
That's a great question. So to the kind of cost comparison to begin with, degraded lands do have a slight additional cost because of the type of racking infrastructure that would be needed to be used. So that's something that we're hoping that over time, as these degraded lands become more utilized for solar, that those costs can come down. But that it does add a few cents per watt as the way the comparison goes. To the second question about utilizing revenues from solar for afforestation, that is part of the model that we're hoping to pursue at the demonstration project level. So we believe that if we can generate lease revenues on a site owned by TNC, that those could be reinvested for other programmatic activities, be it kind of more expanded workforce development or afforestation or other activities like that.
And I'll just chime in one more thought there, which is so I think I can understand why someone would have concern of saying, well, do you really want to drive a solar industry in this region? Because what if that leads to deforestation? I'm not super worried about that at this point, because West Virginia is blessed with these beautiful views you're looking on this photo, which means that we also have the least flat land of any state in the country. So pretty much the only flat land in West Virginia is these former mine sites, and you need flat land for solar. So it's just a happy confluence of reuse of those flat degraded lands in a way that we don't think will heavily impact surrounding forests.
And another question here was, could you talk a little bit more about wind potential, since there's clearly can be kind of a tension if you're reducing forests for solar, if you're not able to take advantage of some of those degraded lands. Is wind on the rise in the Appalachian area as well?
Yeah, so wind, yes, there's a lot of wind in the Central Appalachians, and the largest wind farm, unless this has changed in the last year, which it could have for sure, but the largest wind installation east of the Mississippi is in West Virginia as of a year ago. That may have changed. So a lot of wind energy potential. The really unfortunate aspect, I guess I should start by saying TNC supports all renewable energy in the right places whenever possible. But the way that the landscape in the Central Appalachians is configured is the only places where you have economically suitable wind energy is on top of these big mountains that really do form the backbone of those climate resilient forests. And so wind, unfortunately, has led to a lot of forest fragmentation and deforestation in the region. But we think that there are a lot of really suitable places for it in surrounding states like Ohio and others. And this is one of the reasons that we originally, a couple of years ago, started really delving deeply into this solar on minelands idea, because we wanted to rapidly support the scale out of renewable energy, but we don't want it to come at a cost of forests.
Thank you for that. That was an interesting answer. So I'm going to go ahead. I think that's all for the questions that we have here today. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my my final slide here with some contact information, and I want to go through and just thank our speakers one more time here. So let's see, what do we have? So close here. I just want to pull up our full lineup again, and thank everyone for joining today. And a big thank you to our speakers, Campbell, Beth, Eric. Really appreciated this overview. Really interesting. It's great to kind of dig in on some of the regional challenges, socioeconomic challenges to climate change considerations and land management. So this was really, really insightful, and a nice shift away from sometimes very high-level discussions about what this should look like. So it was really, really fascinating. I'd also like to thank members of the Forest Climate Working Group and the Forest Climate Working Group Steering Committee for all the support and guidance. And again, for everyone joining, the webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted within a few days to the Forest Carbon and Climate Program website. And if you have any questions, you can email us at forestc@msu.edu, or even suggestions for speakers. I'm beginning planning the lineup for next year as well, so please reach out with any ideas. And so with that, I'll thank our speakers once again, and I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you so much.